I woke before dawn to silence so thick it pressed against my ears. The cabin was cold the way it always was in early spring, that bone-deep cold that reminds you winter hasn't quite finished with you yet. One coffee cup sat on the shelf. One plate waited by the wash basin. One chair pulled close to the fire pit. Its mate shoved against the far wall where I wouldn't have to look at it. 2 years since Thomas died. 2 years of these rituals. I dressed in the dark, fingers working through the familiar motions. Didn't need light for this. My body knew the routine the way it knew breathing. Pull on the work dress, faded calico that had seen better days, tie the apron, braid my hair without a mirror. Some mornings I wondered if I was still real or just a collection of habits moving through an empty house. The coffee was bitter. I'd forgotten sugar existed, forgotten sweetness was possible. Outside, the land stretched gray and waiting. My land now, though it had been ours once. Thomas used to stand in this exact spot, thumbs hooked in his belt, planning the season ahead. His silence had been full of thoughts, plans, dreams. Mine was just empty. I walked the property as the sun broke, grudging over the horizon. The south fence leaned badly, another winter of wind and neglect showing through. The chicken coop needed re-roofing before the next storm. And the garden plot waited. That square of earth that would need planting soon if I wanted to eat come summer. I stared at it, calculating the work involved, the digging, the planting, the constant tending. Too much for one person. Had been too much last year. Would be impossible this year. I wasn't complaining. Just stating facts. I'd learned the difference. Back inside. I passed that second chair. The one I'd pushed against the wall after the funeral. Sometimes I thought about burning it for firewood. Never did. Didn't examine why. Examining things led to feeling things. And feeling things didn't plant crops or mend fences. The morning passed in familiar patterns. Feed the chickens, collect eggs, haul water from the well, mend the tear in my other dress. Small tasks that filled hours without filling the hollowness. I'd become efficient at surviving. Efficient wasn't the same as living, but it kept you breathing. By afternoon, I noticed clouds building west, dark ones, their bellies heavy with rain or worse. The kind that turned the prairie mean. I moved faster then, securing what I could. Brought the chickens in early, checked the shutters, stacked extra wood by the door. But I was moving slower than I used to. Exhaustion wasn't dramatic. It didn't knock you down all at once. It just settled into your bones and stayed there. A constant weight you learned to carry. I wondered when exactly I'd stopped talking out loud. When had the last words I'd spoken aloud been thank you to the mercantile clerk on my last trip to town? That was Tuesday. 3 days of silence. Poverty had a particular smell. I'd discovered. Like old wood and older worry, I'd grown used to it. The loneliness. Though that smelled like nothing at all. The storm clouds reached the edge of my property as I was latching the chicken coop. That's when I saw him a rider on the horizon, heading straight toward my cabin. My shoulders tensed automatically. Company meant complications. Complications meant choices I didn't want to make. I stood there watching him approach, my hand still on the coop latch, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Dread mixed with something that might have been hope. If I'd still remembered what hope felt like, he was soaked by the time he reached my porch. I studied him from the window before opening the door the way you study storm damage. Assessing what's broken. Rancher. Buy his gear. Alone. Horse looked as tired as he did. No obvious threat in his posture. But I'd learned assumptions could kill you on the frontier. Thunder rolled close enough to rattle the windows. I opened the door but didn't step back to let him in. Not yet. Storm's bad, he said. Simple statement. Not begging. I respected that. Cabin small. I countered. He nodded. Waited. Didn't push. Didn't make excuses or try to charm his way inside. Just stood there in the rain, water running off his hat brim, and waited for me to make my decision. I hated that I noticed he waited instead of pushing. Why was kindness so unsettling? Lightning split the sky. The crack of thunder followed so fast, they were almost one sound. The kind of storm that killed people caught outside. I remembered what it was like to be caught in weather like this. Remembered being human. Before surviving had worn that humanity down to efficient edges. You can stay, I said finally, but we'll have to share the space. His eyebrows rose slightly. Waiting for the rest. One room, I continued, my voice flat and businesslike. I'll take the floor near the fire. You keep to your corner. We maintain proper distance. Yes, ma'am. He stepped inside, and the cabin shrank. I became hyper-aware of every sound he made. Boots on the floorboards, saddlebags settling in the corner. The rustle of his coat as he removed it. His presence filled my carefully maintained emptiness like water rushing into a hole you didn't know was there. I busied myself with coffee, pulled out the pot, measured grounds with hands that wanted to shake, poured water, set it on the stove, anything to avoid, looking at how thoroughly he'd disrupted my space. When I finally turned around, he'd settled in the far corner like he'd promised. Wasn't watching me. Was just sitting quiet, steam rising from his wet clothes. Coffee'll be ready soon, I said. Appreciate it. That was all. No small talk. No questions about why a woman was living alone or commentary on my situation. Men and their silences. I'd forgotten how they could be companionable instead of accusing. I set out cornbread and beans for supper. He ate without comment. No complaints about the plain food. No compliments either. Just ate steadily, methodically, like a man used to being grateful for whatever came his way. The storm hammered the roof. Wind shrieked around the corners of the cabin. I was suddenly, fiercely glad I'd let him in. Not for his sake, for mine. Because sitting across from another human, even a stranger, even in silence, was different than sitting alone. Was evidence I was still a person who could make human choices. I watched his hands as he lifted his cup. Capable hands. Scarred and weathered. Thomas had hands like that. I looked away quickly. Comparison was a trap. After supper, we settled into our separate corners. He pulled out a book, worn pages. Leather cover, dark with age. I was surprised. Most drifters didn't carry books. He caught me looking. Poetry, he said, as if that explained something. Poetry, I repeated. He almost smiled. Seemed lighter than carrying people. I didn't know what to say to that. So I said nothing. Went back to my mending. But I thought about his words while my needle pulled thread through fabric. about what kind of man carried poetry and what kind of weight he was trying to lighten. Why did proper distance suddenly feel like cowardice? When had being safe started feeling like being afraid that night? I lay on my bedroll near the fire, listening to him breathe in the far corner. The storm still hammered outside. I counted his breaths without meaning to steady. Even. The sound of someone who could sleep anywhere. Found myself matching my breathing to his, the way you do with someone you trust. Then I caught myself doing it, stopped, started again, without meaning to. Sleep didn't come easy when you were sharing space you'd kept empty so long. The storm lasted 3 days. By the second morning, we'd established awkward rhythms neither of us acknowledged. I cooked. He cleaned without being asked, washing the dishes while I pretended not to notice. I mended by firelight. He repaired the chair that had been broken for months, the one I'd been stepping around. Meaning to fix, but never quite managing. We were dancing around each other in a space too small for dancing. Third morning, the rain had gentled to drizzle. I was measuring flour for biscuits when he spoke. "I could stay on," he said. "Help with spring work." My hands froze in the flour sack. The offer was too close to what I needed, which made it dangerous. "Can't pay you," I said flatly. Can barely feed 2 mouths. Didn't ask for payment. I turned to look at him. He was standing by the window, looking out at the gray morning, not looking at me, giving me space to think. "Just work and a place to sleep?" He continued. "Been drifting since I lost my place. Got tired of moving. Thought maybe I'd try staying." His honesty caught me off guard. Most men dressed up their needs in pride. He just laid his out plain. I weighed pride against reality. The planting wouldn't get done by me alone. The fences wouldn't get fixed. Another year of barely surviving would break something in me that hadn't broken yet. Maybe already had. "Why?" I asked. He was quiet so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Finally. "Lost my land 2 years back. Drought. Then debts. Been working for others ever since. Thought maybe." He trailed off. Started again. Thought maybe it was time to stop running from it. "I'm not easy to stay around," I warned. "I've gotten used to silence, to managing alone." "Don't expect you to be easy," he replied, and something in his voice made me look at him sharper. "Just need you to be honest." Something in my chest loosened. A knot I hadn't known was there. I set the terms carefully. Partnership of labor, separate corners, respect maintained. He'd help with planting and repairs. I'd provide meals and shelter. Nothing more complicated than that. We shook hands on it, my palm rough against his rougher one. The touch surprised me. How long since I'd touched another person, the mercantile clerk, when he'd handed me change? Before that, I couldn't remember. I told myself it was practical. Just practicality. But practicality didn't explain why I'd added more beans to the pot before he'd asked. Didn't explain the relief coursing through me. Thomas used to say I thought too much. Maybe he was right. But thinking had kept me alive when feeling would have buried me. That night, after he'd gone out to check his horse, I stood in the cabin we'd be sharing and let myself imagine it. Spring planting with someone to help carry the load. Fences repaired properly instead of patched desperately. Meals where I cooked for 2 instead of 1. Small things, nothing dramatic, but they filled the hollowness in ways I hadn't expected. Morning sun broke through as the storm finally cleared. He walked out to assess the property. Shoulders straight. Walk purposeful. I watched from the window, watched him move through my land like he belonged there. Maybe help didn't always mean surrender. Maybe sometimes it just meant not being alone in the work. Maybe I was braver than I'd given myself credit for. Or maybe I was just tired enough to stop pretending I could do this alone. Either way, we had a deal. And deals were things I understood. Safer than hope, more reliable than wishes. The land smelled different in spring, wet earth and possibility. Green things pushing up toward the sun. We worked separately at first, him on the southern fence line, me preparing garden plots. But I was aware of him constantly. The rhythm of his hammer, his occasional pause. The way he moved with purpose that had been missing from my property for 2 years. I told myself I was just keeping track of his progress, making sure he was working. But that was a lie I saw through immediately. By the end of the first week, I noticed I was setting out 2 cups before deciding to make coffee, adding extra to the stew pot without conscious thought. Humming while I cooked, couldn't remember the last time I'd hummed. These small betrayals of my carefully maintained distance troubled me. I was becoming someone else without permission. The cabin felt less like a box I was trapped in and more like walls that held us both. Small shift. Monumental difference. One afternoon, he finished the fence work early and joined me in the garden. Showed me a better way to stake tomato plants. Something about wind resistance and the angle of prevailing. Storms. I bristled automatically. Thomas planted them different. He nodded, not arguing. Sometimes different works better. No judgment in his voice, just fact. I studied the way he'd arranged the stakes, saw the logic in it. Hated admitting he was right. Did it anyway. Show me again, I said. We worked side by side, his hands demonstrating the technique, mine following. He was patient when I got it wrong, didn't take over, just adjusted my grip and let me try again. There, he said when I finally got it, that'll hold through anything the prairie throws at it. I wondered when I'd started counting his footsteps. When had his silence become familiar? When had I begun to miss it when he was gone? The moment happened. 3 days later, we were both reaching for the spade, him from the left, me from the right. Our hands collided. His palm was warm against mine. Calloused in the same places mine was calloused. Evidence of the same kind of work, the same kind of life. He pulled back immediately, respectful of boundaries, but I felt the warmth of his touch for 3 heartbeats after. Didn't pull away as fast as I should have. Let the moment stretch before finally withdrawing. Sorry, he muttered. No harm, I said, but my voice came out rougher than intended. That evening, we'd fallen into a new routine. He washed up at the pump while I started supper. We ate in comfortable silence, not the careful silence of the first week, but something easier, natural. After, he read by firelight, sometimes aloud if I asked. Poetry about prairies and distances. Words that captured the loneliness and beauty of this life in ways I'd never had language for. I caught myself looking at him more often. The concentration on his face when he read, the way his voice gentled on certain phrases, the surprising tenderness in how he turned pages. Careful not to damage the worn paper. Sometimes I caught him looking at me too. I'd spent 2 years in this cabin believing I was alone. but watching him across the fire, listening to poetry about longing and belonging, I realized I'd been alone, past tense. I wasn't anymore. And that terrified me more than loneliness ever had, because loneliness was predictable, constant, safe. This, whatever this was becoming, was none of those things. It started small. I was kneading bread. Routine task done 1,000 times. But my hands were shaking. The dough resisted. Everything resisted. The way life had resisted for 2 years. Thomas used to make me laugh while I kneaded bread. Made terrible jokes. Awful puns about rising to the occasion and being on a roll. I'd groan and throw flour at him, and the bread would somehow turn out perfect anyway. The memory hit like a fist to the chest. I don't mean to cry. Hadn't cried since the funeral. Thought I'd used up all my tears? That grief had wrung me dry and left me functional. But they came anyway, silent at first, my shoulders shaking while I tried to maintain the rhythm of kneading. Then gasping, my breath catching on sobs I couldn't control. I hated this. Hated being seen like this. Turned away from where he sat mending harness, hoping he wouldn't notice. He noticed, but he didn't speak. Didn't rush over to comfort or fix or make it better. Just pulled a chair near, not too near, respecting my space even now, and sat, waited. His presence was a steady thing, an anchor. When I could finally breathe again, when the tears had slowed to something manageable, he said simply, "It's all right to miss him." The kindness in those words almost started me crying again. "It's been 2 years," I said, my voice raw. "Should be over it by now." Grief doesn't follow schedules. I wiped my face with my apron, tried to pull myself together. Failed. The words kept coming, pouring out like they'd been dammed up waiting for someone to hear them. Fever took him. I said, 3 days from first symptom to grave. I couldn't. I stopped. Started again. There was nothing I could do. Nothing anyone could do. He just burned up and died and left me here. He didn't offer platitudes. Didn't tell me Thomas was in a better place or that time heals all wounds. Just listened. I thought if I needed no one, I couldn't lose anyone. I continued. Thought isolation was protection. But it's not protection, it's just another kind of dying. Slower. Lonelier. I know that fight, he said quietly. After I lost my land, I kept asking, why keep going? What's the point of fighting when you lose everything anyway? I looked at him then. Really looked. Saw the same exhaustion I felt. The same weight of carrying too much alone for too long. What changed? I asked. He was quiet. Considering. I realized I wasn't fighting alone to survive. I was fighting alone to prove I could. But proving something to nobody is just pride wearing a disguise. He looked at his hands. You don't fight alone for yourself. You fight alone to prove you can. But you fight together because that's what makes it worth it. His words settled something in me I didn't know was unsettled. Or maybe unsettled something I'd pretended was settled. I couldn't tell which. I'm tired, I admitted. So tired of being strong alone. Then don't be alone. Simple as that. Like it was easy. Like choosing to let someone in wasn't the most terrifying thing I could imagine. I'd spent 2 years building walls. Took him 6 weeks to show me they were prison bars. I don't know how. I said. Don't know how to be with someone again. How to share this space, this life. How to risk caring when caring leads to losing. Neither do I, he said. But maybe we figure it out together. That night, I lay in my corner and thought about his words. About fighting together, about risk and reward, and whether I was brave enough to try again. The cabin felt different, smaller and bigger at once. He was in his corner, me in mine. But the distance felt less like safety and more like hesitation. I wondered what would happen if I crossed it. Didn't. Not yet. But the wondering itself was progress. Or danger. Maybe they were the same thing. The frost came on a Wednesday night, late enough in the season to catch us unprepared. I woke to him shaking my shoulder, his voice urgent but controlled. We've got maybe 2 hours before sunrise. Everything we planted is going to freeze if we don't act now. I was up and moving before I was fully awake, pulling on boots, grabbing blankets. No time for fear or hesitation. The work demanded everything. We moved like dancers in the dark. He called for blankets. I was already bringing them. I pointed to the most vulnerable plants. He was already there. No wasted words. No wasted motion. This was partnership in its purest form. Trust made action. I directed him to cover the tomatoes while I built small fires between the rows, using scraps of wood and dried grass to generate heat without flame reaching the plants. He questioned my technique once. Won't the smoke damage them? Smoke rises, heat stays low. Need the warmth more than we need clean air. He nodded and moved on. Trusted my knowledge, my land, my expertise. But then I relied on his strength for the heavy lifting, his different perspective on wind patterns when deciding where to place windbreaks. We argued once sharp but quick about fire placement. Too close to the beans, I said. Wind's coming from the south. Fire here blocks it. I looked at the sky, gauged the wind direction. He was right. There, I said, pointing to his spot. You're right. His surprise at my admission almost made me smile. Almost. The work consumed us. At some point, he draped his coat over my shoulders without asking. At some point, I accepted it without protesting. We worked through the darkness, racing against the coming dawn and the killing cold it would bring. My hands ached. My back screamed, but I felt more alive than I had in 2 years. Dawn broke gradual and cruel, the temperature dropping as the light increased. We walked the rows together, assessing damage by the thin early light. Some plants were lost, the lettuce mostly, and some of the early squash, but we'd saved most of it. The tomatoes, the beans, the corn seedlings that would feed us through winter. We stood in the middle of the garden, too exhausted to move, and surveyed what we'd accomplished together. I haven't felt this useful in years, he said quietly. I understood completely. We hadn't just saved plants. We'd proven something to ourselves, to each other, that we could face crisis together. That partnership meant bringing different strengths to a shared purpose. I couldn't have done this alone. I said, first time I'd spoken those words in 2 years. First time I'd admitted need without feeling shame. Didn't have to, he replied. We went inside as the sun climbed higher, made coffee with hands that shook from exhaustion, sat by the fire and didn't speak, because words seemed unnecessary. This was what partnership looked like. Not one person strong and one weak, not savior and saved. Just two people bringing different strengths to shared purpose. I'd been so focused on not needing rescue. I'd forgotten partnership wasn't about needing, it was about choosing. He fell asleep in his chair, head tilted back, completely spent. I really watched him for the first time without guarding my expression. Saw the lines around his eyes, the gray in his beard, the capable gentleness in his weathered face. Something in my chest shifted and settled. This, I thought, this is what I want. The thought didn't terrify me as much as it should have. Days passed quietly after the frost. Too quietly. We'd fallen into rhythms so comfortable they felt dangerous. Morning coffee where we didn't need words. Work divided naturally according to strength and skill. Evening meals where silence was companionship instead of emptiness. I caught myself planning around his presence, thinking in terms of we instead of I, making decisions about next season, next year, like there was a next year with him in it. One morning I woke up and realized I was happy. The realization paralyzed me with fear. It built slowly over the next days. Every time I saw him, every shared meal, every quiet evening by the fire, they felt like borrowed time. Like something that couldn't possibly last. I started imagining all the ways this could end. Him leaving when the season work finished. Him getting hurt. Him deciding I wasn't worth the trouble of staying. Him dying. Like Thomas had died. Sudden and senseless and final. The fear grew teeth. Started eating at me from the inside. On a Tuesday morning, for no reason except my own terror, I picked a fight. You should think about moving on, I said while we were eating breakfast. My voice was too sharp, too sudden. He looked up from his plate. What? Spring work's mostly done. You've fulfilled your end of the deal. No reason to stay when there are better opportunities elsewhere. He set down his fork carefully. Is that what you want? What I want doesn't matter. I'm just being practical. Practical, he repeated, and I heard the hurt under his careful tone. We both knew this was temporary. I pressed on, hating myself but unable to stop. Better to end it clean now than drag it out. I wasn't planning on leaving. Well, maybe you should. My voice was cruel now, deliberately. I can manage alone. That's what I do. That's what I'm good at. He stood up then, looked at me with something that might have been understanding or might have been disappointment. What are you afraid of? The question cracked something open. I stood too. Anger and fear boiling over. I'm afraid of this, I shouted, gesturing between us. Of needing you, of depending on you, of building something only to have it ripped away again. You want to know what I'm afraid of? I'm afraid you'll leave. I'm afraid you'll die. I'm afraid I'll wake up alone again. But this time, I'll know exactly what I lost. The words echoed in the small cabin. I'd rather be alone and safe than partnered and vulnerable. I finished, my voice breaking. At least, loneliness is predictable. He was quiet for so long I thought he'd just walk out. Maybe that's what I wanted to drive him away before he could leave on his own terms. Strike first. Protect the last fragile piece of myself that hadn't been broken yet. Then he spoke, and his voice was rough with emotion. I'm afraid too. I looked at him, surprised into silence. Afraid I'll wake up, and you'll have decided I don't belong here. Afraid I'm building something that'll get taken away again. afraid I care more than you do." He stepped closer, but I'd rather risk that than walk away from something real. His admission matching mine. Meeting mine undid me completely. "You don't understand," I said, but my anger was gone now, replaced by exhaustion. "Everyone I've cared about leaves, or dies, or just goes. I can't survive losing someone again." "Then don't lose me," he said simply. "I'm right here. I'm choosing to stay. But you have to choose, too." He left then, went out to check the animals, gave me space to think. The cabin felt impossibly empty without him. I sat in the silence I'd once craved and faced the real choice. Did I close the door again, retreat into safety and loneliness? Or did I choose courage risk, grief for the possibility of love? I thought about Thomas, about what he'd want for me. Not eternal mourning, full living. He'd want me to be happy, even if that happiness came with someone else. Fear was a more faithful companion than love ever was. Fear never left, never died, never disappointed. But fear also never laughed with me, never made coffee just the way I liked it, never looked at me like I mattered. I'd been protecting my heart by keeping it locked away. But what was I protecting it for? Hearts aren't meant to be preserved. They're meant to be spent. Grief had taught me how to survive losing someone, but it never taught me how to risk having someone again. That lesson was harder, required more courage than any I'd shown yet. I heard his footsteps on the porch. My heart hammered. He'd come inside and I'd have to choose defend my walls or open my door. The handle turned. I stood up, took a breath, and made my decision. Morning came with unusual clarity, the way it does after sleepless nights spent deciding who you want to be. I woke to find him packing his bedroll, folding it with the careful precision of someone trying not to feel anything. My cruel words from yesterday had convinced him I meant them. "Wait," I said. One word. He froze. I crossed the cabin, crossed the space I'd kept carefully preserved between us for weeks, and stood close. Enough to see the pain in his eyes. Pain I'd put there with my fear, dressed up as practicality. "I was wrong," I said. Simple, true. The hardest words I'd ever spoken. He didn't speak, just waited, giving me space to explain or to retreat, always giving me the choice. I got scared. I continued, scared of how much I was starting to need you, how much I was starting to want this us to be real, permanent. So I tried to push you away before you could leave on your own. "I wasn't leaving on my own," he said quietly. I know that now. I think I knew it then. But knowing and believing are different things. I took a breath, found courage I didn't know I had. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you decide anything." He nodded. When Thomas died, I decided I was done with needing people, done with vulnerability, done with the risk of loving someone only to lose them. The words came easier now, like a dam breaking. I built walls, told myself they were protection, but they were really just prison bars, and I was the only prisoner. I looked at my hands, rough, capable hands that had learned to do everything alone. Then you showed up. And slowly, so slowly, I barely noticed you started dismantling those walls. Not by pushing, not by demanding, just by being steady, by being present, by showing me what partnership looks like when both people bring their whole selves to it. I looked up at him then, let him see everything I was feeling, somewhere between sharing space and sharing work, between silence and conversation. Between your corner and mine, I started caring for you. Not as hired help, not as convenience, as a partner, as someone I want to choose every day. My voice caught, but I pushed through. I need you, I said, and the words cost me everything and freed me from everything. Not just your work or your help with the planting. I need you, the man who reads poetry by firelight. Who fixes things without being asked? Who lets me be strong and vulnerable at the same time? Who looks at me like I'm worth staying for? I reached for his hand. First time I'd initiated touch. My fingers laced with his, rough palm against rough palm. The fit wasn't perfect. It was better than perfect. It was real. I can offer hard work, I said. Honest companionship. A life that won't be easy, but will be shared. If that's enough, I let the question hang. I already decided to stay, he said softly, and his voice was thick with emotion. Was just waiting for you to decide you wanted me to. The simplicity of it made me laugh half sob, half joy. All the drama had been mine alone. He'd already chosen. Had chosen weeks ago. Maybe. Was just patient enough to wait for me to catch up. So we're doing this, I asked. Actually doing this? What exactly are we doing building something? I said, together. A real partnership, not temporary. Not just until the season ends. Real. He smiled then, and it transformed his whole face. I'm willing if you are. I'm terrified, I admitted. But I'm willing. He pulled me closer then, his other hand coming up to cup my face with surprising gentleness. Being terrified means you're doing something brave. I thought strength meant needing no one, I said, needing him to understand. But you taught me true strength is being brave enough to need someone, to choose them, to risk everything for the possibility of something real. Standing there, holding his hand, our foreheads nearly touching. I understood something fundamental. Vulnerability wasn't weakness. It was the foundation of real intimacy. Interdependence was more courageous than independence had ever been. I'd spent 2 years surviving. Maybe it was time to start living. Maybe the bravest thing I could say wasn't, I need no one. Maybe it was, I need you so, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Partners, partners. I agreed. Then, braver and more. If you're willing. His smile widened. I'm willing. We stood in the morning light, hands clasped, both of us grinning like fools. The cabin looked different now. Not too small, not too empty. Just right for the life we were choosing to build together. Love real. Chosen. Conscious love was always an act of courage. Always a risk. Always worth it. Summer arrived with its particular prairie heat, turning the land gold and endless. I narrate this from 3 months in, looking back at the woman I was and the woman I've become. Both are me. The first survived alone. The second learned to thrive together. Morning coffee is shared now in companionable silence. He checks the fence lines while I tend the garden we planted together, tomatoes climbing their stakes, beans heavy with pods, corn tall enough to whisper in the wind. These small rituals are the architecture of intimacy. I don't take them for granted. We make decisions together now. About expanding the garden next spring. About fixing the barn roof before winter. About whether to get another horse or invest in more chickens. We discuss, sometimes disagree, always compromise. It's not always easy, but it's honest. Real. Last week he got news about his former land sold to pay debts. Someone else living his old life now. I held him while he processed the loss. Didn't try to fix it. Just offered presents the way he'd offered it to me that night. He told me he was grateful. Said losing that land led him here, to me, to us, to this life we're building from shared effort and shared hope. I'm still strong, still capable, still the woman who survived 2 years alone. But I've added to that strength rather than replaced it. I've learned to accept help without feeling diminished, to offer help without diminishing him. We've built something neither of us could have built alone. The cabin that felt too small for my loneliness turned out to be perfectly sized for our life. Funny how space expands when you fill it with love instead of fear. I set 2 plates on the table for supper now. Don't pause. Don't marvel. It's simply what I do. The second plate. The second cup. The second chair pulled close. These aren't reminders of what I lost. They're celebrations of what I chose. Yesterday, while I was mending his shirt, not mine to mend, but mine to care for, because that's what we do for each other. I thought about what I'd learned about vulnerability as courage, about interdependence as strength, about how real intimacy begins when we stop pretending we're self-sufficient and start building genuine interdependence. I used to think surviving was enough, but surviving is just not dying. Living real living requires risking your heart, requires choosing someone even when you know you could lose them, requires being brave enough to say, I need you, and mean it. The bravest thing you can say isn't, I need no one. It's, I need you. Evening falls now with golden light through the cabin windows. We sit together after supper, him reading poetry aloud while I work on the quilt I'm making for our bed. Our bed, we moved the second chair back from the wall last month. Started sharing the space we'd kept carefully divided. Small step, monumental change. He looks up from his book and catches me watching him. Smiles. I smile back. This easy exchange of affection, it's everything I thought I'd lost forever. Everything I didn't believe I deserved to have again. What are you thinking about? He asks. How brave we are, I say, both of us. You for staying, me for letting you. He sets down his book, reaches for my hand. Not just brave, lucky. Maybe he's right. Maybe it's both. Maybe bravery is recognizing luck when it arrives and having the courage to hold on to it. This is what I chose. This is what I fought for. Not rescue, not salvation. Just honest partnership with someone who sees me clearly and loves me anyway. The cabin holds us both now. My heart holds him, and I'm no longer afraid of what that means. We built this life from scraps and hope and daily choosing. Built it strong enough
to weather storms. Built it together.
And somewhere between his corner and mine, between silence and conversation, between fear and trust, I learned the truth that changed everything. Real intimacy begins when we stop pretending we're self-sufficient and start building genuine interdependence. The bravest thing you can say isn't, "I need no one." It's, "I need you," and meaning it